hope everyone else will, I hope everyone else will say hi, but I'm just going to share my screen now, just quickly. I hope you guys can actually see it now. Can you see it?
Yes.
Ellie? Yeah, perfect.
Yes.
Yeah, great. So so I guess just a little review of who I am. So I have 5 years of experience in HR. So basically, I actually started in a nonprofit. I did 2 years there in terms of talent management. So that meaning, I have done everything from helping out with the recruitment until ensuring the career path and learning and development of everyone in the organization. So that was like my first taste of how it is being in HR as an industry, and I kind of like started like baptism by fire. So right after university, I joined this nonprofit and I was hired, and I kind of just like learned everything on the job, and that also actually really allowed me to like learn the HR industry quite fast, because I had to kind of like do it on my own and really start to help, ask help from mentors, for example, or read a lot of books, and also like maybe start doing some online courses and all these things, just to really like equip myself with the right skills and knowledge as I started this journey when I was still quite young, let's just say that. And after I finished my stint in this nonprofit, I actually started my real corporate job, if you can say that, working as an in-house recruiter. I moved to Dubai for a year and a half, and that's where kind of like I started being a recruiter. It was a technical recruitment, so I was recruiting engineers and IT specialists, but it was mainly really directed to a certain niche industry, which was rails, the rail sector. And well, I failed to mention that like actually that 2 years of experience that I had with a nonprofit was actually in Denmark as well. So originally I'm from the Philippines, but I moved to Denmark because of that nonprofit gig that I got. And then I moved to Dubai very briefly, and then I came back to Denmark. And long story short, the easy explanation is that I met Dane, and I got married to him. And so I moved back to Denmark when I got married, and I kind of like had to restart my career here again. And I was also in the same, I would say, trajectory as many people that are actually expats that moved to Denmark and wanted to start, entering the Danish labor market. So I for sure can also share a little bit about like my experience in that, actually in the last slide of this presentation, on how I actually got started entering the job market. So my first job here actually was a recruiter, and that was for an agency. And for those of you that's not familiar with what agency recruitment is, it's basically a recruiting agency. So like you would have many different companies partnering with you, so then you recruit for them. So that was my job for around almost 2 years. So within that span of time, I actually recruited for over 15 tech SaaS companies in Denmark. It's mainly startups and scale-ups, which is also obviously like the biggest market in terms of tech in tech sector in Denmark, for sure. I mean, there are like big companies out there that are obviously tech focused as well, but mainly like the tech scene in Denmark is really on the startup and scale-up environment, because everyone else that kind of like breaks through that like barrier of being a startup usually moves to like the US and Silicon Valley and all these things. So that was like my experience. And currently I actually moved to from recruitment to something else, because I really wanted to try another experience. And now I'm a SaaS implementation expert at eloomi. So basically what I do is that I help with customer onboarding, because we do have a software, an HR software. So that kind of also tied into my experience getting into another job in the same industry, but obviously entering really into the tech sector, if you can say that. So software as a service. So that's my brief background. Yeah, so Ellie actually tasked me today to just give you guys an overview of, like what kind of roles are there in tech and SaaS companies. I'm just going to give you like an overview of the generic ones, because I know that obviously for every company there are differences in terms of what kind of roles they have. Obviously the product that they provide or they sell is highly like specific, so the roles would probably be specific as well at some point, but these are just generic roles. And I will also want to point out some of the roles where I truly believe that is like an easy gateway for people that just want to, as Ellie mentioned, to transfer their skills from maybe another industry and wanting to enter into tech. So there's a lot of misconception that when you say, oh, you're in tech, that everyone needs to code. Everyone really needs to be like, technical and like have a lot of these knowledge in terms of, like software and all these kinds of things. That's obviously like a big misconception, right? Because then tech companies or SaaS companies in general function just as any normal companies do. They have different kinds of departments that take care of different aspects of the business. So I'm going to show you a little bit about like, okay, let's just say there's this company, tech company.io. These are probably the normal like big departments that they have, like sales, marketing, product, customer service, and operations. So that's also something that you can even copy over to any other companies out there. Where it might diverge is obviously like, how sales teams are created. And then the marketing team could also be different, and especially the product, right? So if it's a tech company, you will probably expect that there are like developers, people that are doing product innovation, doing project or IT support, and then customer service is pretty typical, and then operations are also pretty typical positions. So I'm gonna dig deeper into each of the main departments, if you can say that, just to give you an overview of like what are out there, what are the common ones. First of all, in sales, most of these are the roles, and I'm not going to dig deep into like, oh, what do they do and all these kinds of things, because I know that within this What the Tech series that they want to also provide like maybe some specific guest, or like they want to invite specific guests that might shed some light on the specific roles as well, just to give you an overview in case you have certain interest on certain roles. So these are common sales roles, like starting as sales development, sales executive, people that are working with customer success, so that's kind of like post sales, if you can say that, and then people that are also like in sales operations or business intelligence, and all these things. So that's kind of like the common sales roles. And I would say that like those that I put a little like star are probably the roles that I believe are are much easier to enter if you just want to like transition into the industry, because mostly, like for example, as a sales development rep, a lot of tech companies don't really need you to have an experience in tech. It's a different skill set. It's more like communication, negotiation, and all these kinds of things. So it's more like really soft skills that are more looked into in this role than your actual like relation to the industry. And it's similar like with marketing roles as well. As you can see, like some of the most common ones that you can also enter pretty fast into a tech company is like, let's say, social media. I mean, if you have experience in social media and in general, like, web analytics and all these kinds of things, like those are really transferable skills. So it might also even be an advantage for someone with this specific skill set to move into another sector. Let's just say if the company that you're moving into, a tech company, might be producing a product that comes from the industry that you were from. So I have seen a lot of these kinds of transition, because these are just like really hard skills that is not tied to a specific industry, right? Like also content, like there are really a lot of experts within, social media, digital marketing, content, and all these things that are quite transferable in terms of skills. And in terms of operations as well, these are really typical roles that, you would find possibly in any company, regardless of what industry they are from. So I would say that the easy entry would probably be recruitment, and maybe something to do with like office management. So let's just say recruitment, a lot of companies that are, like one recruiter, for example, don't necessarily even need experience. When I started as a recruiter, I never had any experience on how to recruit, but there are certain jobs in a recruitment flow where it's very easy to learn, and as long as you're eager to learn and you have certain skills, especially like soft skills like communication, and like, let's say if you are organized, or a lot of these different kinds of soft skills, it's very easy to actually go into recruitment. I know that in Denmark, if you are, let's say, an expat, and you might not, you're not able to speak Danish and all these things, that can be, a potential barrier. I know that, but there are also other ways to, to go about these kinds of jobs. And another thing is like office management. I know that, like, okay, when people say, oh, what is office management? Are you like the one doing just like random stuff in the office and all these things? I mean, office management as a job actually has completely evolved, like especially in tech companies, where your role is not just like to stack up the fridge or something like that. There's a lot of things like, taking care of like tech equipments, for example, also really ensuring a lot of like projects that needs to be done within the office that needs your assistance and all these kinds of things. That also doesn't ask you to be from the tech sector. It's just something that you probably have similar experience to and transfer directly to the job as you enter the tech sector, right? And also customer service roles. This is also something that I think are relatively, easy entry point as well, considering that these are also hard skills that can easily be transferable. Of course, there are always some preference if you have experience in a tech product, because there is a learning curve that you actually need to enter and finish to be able to be like, let's just say, the best customer support in a tech company. And that is actually something that I am undergoing now, because then I started as a sales rep at eloomi, and then I kind of move on into becoming a customer implementation expert. And so, these are like the technical things that I had to learn and all that, but it's not like it's difficult. It's not, it's not asking you to learn how to code or anything like that, if that's not something of your interest as well. And lastly, obviously, like the big thing I would say would be the tech roles. Of course, I completely understand, and it's very apparent that, like with these hard skills, technical roles, that you need to have certain expertise to really be able to function in a lot of these roles. But not everything needs to be that you need to know how to code, or you need to have all these like, certifications or education as a developer or whatever. I mean, you can see here I have highlighted quite a few that actually you don't need to have hard skills in coding. Like testers, for example, you don't really need to. Of course, you need to have a little bit of inclination on tech products and testing and all these things, but mainly their job is actually see and test if products work the way that they should be. Another thing is that, in many tech projects, they need to have project managers or product owners, as they call it. There's so many names for it, but it's mainly a person that is making sure that, every step of the way of the project is actually managed and timelines are met, and there's like people accountable and all these kinds of things. So there are many project management jobs that are not related to tech. So if you have that background, it's something that, you know, you can also potentially transition into a tech product management role. Another thing is product innovation. I know that, like, if you hear about product innovation, it feels like, okay, now I really do need to have knowledge on certain products, or I need to be able to learn like all these technical things to be able to contribute to this particular department. That's actually, I feel like, is a common misconception, because the thing is, like, it also really depends on what product they have. Let's just say, for example, for me, I work at Eloomi, and we are an HR company. So in that sense, people that have, you know, knowledge, extensive knowledge in HR, like, for example, instructional designers, digital learning experts, and all of these things are actually quite a good fit in terms of product innovation, because then they know exactly what the industry needs. So then they can evaluate, like, okay, what kind of features do we need in our product to make sure that it actually have a product market fit. So that is also something that is very, very interesting. So those are like just an overview of the roles. And as I said, like, I'm not going to, you know, dig deep into all of them. I know that we also have quite an extensive Q&A session following my presentation. And I think that, like, we will definitely have a more fruitful discussion in the Q&A. And of course, you will also be given time to ask some questions as we go. So just for entry into tech, like, what would be like just my general advice if you are very interested to enter the tech sector? I would say one thing is, like, of course, it really depends, obviously, in like where you are in your career, right? Whether you're a new graduate or you're already, you know, quite experienced and you just want to transition into another industry. So it really depends in this sense. But I would say one of the things is upskilling. So while you are already on a job in a different sector, maybe upskilling certain, you know, certain kinds of knowledge that you would be interested, that you think would be a fit for a tech company, is very interesting. Like, I know that, let's just say, I know that in Fearless into Tech, you guys have been having different kinds of, you know, learning circles with coding, for example. It might not be like really advanced ones, but basic. But that could be like, you know, an entry and an addition to your portfolio or your CV, to be able to just have this like break of entering into the tech sector. Another thing is also to start with commercial roles. So if you see that, like, let's say a tech company is hiring and you don't really have you know, hard knowledge yet in terms of like the tech aspect of, let's just say, coding or becoming a developer or whatever it is, like in the tech / product department, then one of the good things are as well, or like best things to do, is to enter in a commercial role. Commercial roles are obviously higher in demand than like the tech roles, because then, you know, it doesn't matter how good your product is. If no one's selling it and if no one's marketing it, it's not really going to happen. So if you're interested, you know, entering into that role where it's relatively like the point of entry is relatively easier, could be interesting. And then you can do the upskilling while you actually have this commercial role. And then maybe then you can, you know, get an internal transition within the company that you can actually start then doing the technical roles. I would say, like, based on my experience, that's kind of like what happened to me. I mean, I'm not in a very technical role right now, but still it's way more technical than being in sales. But starting in sales was an easier entry point for me. And then, you know, once I got the chance to apply for a more like technical role within the company, then I was able to easily enter that than someone that's like coming from the outside, right? And another thing as well, which is also big in the tech industry, especially, I would say, advise this to, like, you know, people that are starting their entry into the job market in Denmark, or just those that are like graduating as well, is to take internships, because the reality is, in the tech industry in Denmark, as I said, like there's a lot of startups and scale-ups. And that means that when you're a smaller company, your finances might not be as sorted out as someone that is a large company. That means that like taking risk on people that they don't really know if they're going to receive a return on investment is a really big risk for these companies. But when you start as an intern, for example, when you are studying, then it's probably, you can expect that either you're paid for a part-time role, or you're not paid at all and you're just gaining it for experience. Then, you know, you kind of like get tested, and then they already have a better feeling of who you are. So then when a full-time job is actually available, then you will probably be one of the first persons that they would look into, since they already have an experience with you. And I think that's one of the things that like a lot of, if you're an expat, for example, that's something that you really need to understand in the Danish market. And then maybe it's a cultural thing as well, that like trust is a big thing for the market. Like if they don't trust you enough, then it's probably rather difficult for, you know, for people or for companies to open up to you. So if they already trust someone and they already have an experience with you, that there's a much higher likelihood that they would like want to work with you in that sense. Yeah, so I know that you might already have like a few questions for me, but this is the last slide that I just want to share as well. It's like my experience in the Danish job market. So I did say that, you know, I worked in Denmark in the beginning, and then I moved abroad, and then I came back, which basically means that I started from scratch. There are some advices that, these are like the main advice that I would say to anyone. Really utilize the power of networking. And by that, I mean, just don't network when you need your network. Like, just start building it. Like, even if you're in school, just make friends. Like, just really open up yourself to possibilities. Like, especially for someone that is an expat, for example, where, you know, you might have friends here, but you don't really have, you know, an extensive like network, especially on the professional side of things. So being open to new experiences and meeting new people and just trying to do that without expecting anything in return is probably like a really, really good investment of your time. I can tell you now that like my two jobs now in Denmark since I came back, I actually got it just by networking. I never like send out like an actual application and be like, okay, I want to apply for this job. It's just someone referred me to something, and then I was lucky enough to to get the job. I mean, you can say it's lucky, but also, you know, I have really been trying to build my network here in Denmark ever since I moved, and ever since I knew that like that's the way to go in terms of the job market. The other thing is that I know this, and it's very common for a lot of people that are just entering the Danish job market, that it's very difficult to enter it. Or like, I mean, maybe it's not for all. It's not all that it's difficult, but a lot of people are having a hard time entering the job market. But the thing is, once you break that and you actually got your foot into the door, there's a very easy way to transition once you are already there. And I think this is also coming from like, you know, our recruiter's point of view, that like when you look at a CV and they already have a job, it doesn't matter if it was an internship or it's a part-time job, but you know that they're employed. Instantly you would think, okay, there must be something in them that they were employed. And if they're not, there is, you know, a bit of stereotype on people that have been unemployed longer. So it kind of just like, maybe it's also a psyche thing for people that are like, okay, what's going on? Why are you not being employed at all? So that's also something that I would say you need to think about. And the last thing is online visibility. I mean, utilizing the power of like LinkedIn, for example, or any other like platform where you can actually network is also a really big thing. Like, first of all, I have actually, you know, met a lot of people and also a lot of mentors for me personally, professionally as well, just by being online and being visible. So you're able to meet different kinds of people from all walks of life, and you might just get some really, really good experiences by meeting people online. So I think that's like, for me, like the top 3 things in terms of like my experience and what I think could be valuable to share in this sense. So yeah, that's like it for me now. I can already see, I haven't really read through the chat just so because I couldn't see it, but I can see that there are some questions as well. And thanks everyone for saying hi. So yeah, I guess I'm ready for the questions, Ellie.
Yeah, exactly. I think before we go or move to the QA sessions in the chat, I have to say that this was an amazing, helpful presentation, Anna. This was really, really great. Perfect overview. Thank you so much for that. And a lot of things that you mentioned resonate a lot with my own experience. I have to say that I also came to Denmark 3 years ago. I have a background in political sciences. I struggled a lot at first to get my foot into the door in the Danish job market, to understand how the sector works, because I'm Ecuadorian German, but I came from the German job market, and there are a lot of differences here, and just understanding all these things was the first important step to do. But what I have noticed as well, and this is basically also why we organized this event in the first place, but it is also one of the reasons why we created Fearless into Tech. It's the reason, or is that in many occasions we try to stick to what we have been doing, to what we studied before, because it's a part of what defines us and it's a part of our identity, our experience. So when we move to a different country and relocate, a lot of things change, starting with the language and the culture. And sometimes, in my experience, it can be hard to let go from the idea that you will continue your career in the same way that you were having your career back in your own home country. So expanding your horizon and also asking yourself what else you can do with the skills that you have already gathered throughout your studies and your career is super important too. So this issue of transferring your skills was very important for me as well when I decided to try out the commercial thing to start with. And that is what allowed me to enter the company that I'm working at the moment, which is Templafy, and it's a scale up here in Denmark. And I also had this experience like you, Anna. So I also started, with a commercial role, and now I transitioned into a technical role, and it was due to the upskilling. So all the things that you mentioned, transferring your soft skills, recommending people to start with commercial positions because there are a lot of possibilities, entry roles in that, upskilling from there, which is also something that I've been doing, increasing the visibility on LinkedIn, and all of that has definitely helped myself to crack the sector, let's say, and move also in the last in the last year I moved from the tourism sector to the tech sector. And we've seen very, very crazy days due to the pandemic. And we see that a lot of people are struggling to either find a job or to have, some certainty regarding what's going to happen in terms of career. And the tech sector is one of the most resilient sectors in that sense. We see that we haven't had any sort of issues in our companies. We've been very privileged, very, very, very safe. So my question to you, apart from those nice, from all the practical stuff that you already mentioned in terms of how to transfer the skills, the upskilling and all of that, what is your take regarding the trends in the industry, in the Danish job market at the moment? So what kind of positions are on high demand, and where do you see is the less amount of applicants, let's say, compared to that high amount of or high demand for jobs?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, I might disappoint a lot of people with this answer, but I mean, it's just the reality that I have also observed. I mean, the higher demand jobs are also the jobs with most applicants, because then it's the easier entry into the role. Like, I would say that definitely for the tech sector, the commercial jobs are also in highest demand. Considering that, like when you have a product that is technical or a software or something like that, you don't really need a lot of people that is developing the product. Like, you kind of just like, once it's finished and then you kind of like maintain it and all these things, what you need to do is literally just to sell it, like to market your product into the world. And so there are more jobs created for the commercial part of the sector. So I would say like that's one of the biggest ones. I mean, there are also, I would say, certain niche niche roles that probably not a lot of people are going to apply, but then it would also take specific transferable skills to enter that. Like, for example, business intelligence or like sales operations, where you need to have an analytical mindset. You don't need to be a programmer, but if you have backgrounds in mathematics or anything like this, like logical kind of education and all these things, those are skills that you can transfer on those specific ones. Because I mean, if you think about it, like in the Danish job market, there's also a big gap in terms of like what people are finishing in school and what are actually in the job market in terms of like the demand in work. There's a lot of people studying social studies and all these kinds of things, which means that a lot of the more technical specific niche jobs is probably not something that the labor market can actually then provide, like in terms of like the employees, right? So that is something that I would say are the interesting roles.
And as you know, the Fearless into Tech community has a strong focus on promoting the participation of women in the tech sector, right? We want to get more women to explore. It doesn't necessarily has to be the hard coding or something, but just like to dare to eventually transfer to the tech sector. And it would be interesting to hear from you what kind of experience do you have, or what have you observed in the last years where you've been working in the sector in terms of gender equality and diversity? How are the tech companies in Copenhagen or in Denmark generally dealing with these kind of things?
Yeah. I mean, I don't have the large like data set of statistics or anything like that at the moment. I also know that like I actually did a little bit of search on it on a Denmark specific case. I believe I was searching in English, so maybe some of the studies are in Danish and all that. But like based on my observation, and obviously having worked with many tech scale-ups and startups, at least within Copenhagen and the outskirts of Denmark, is that there is still a big gender inequality in terms of like the number of women that are working in the sector versus the number of men. And it's not even like the tech specific jobs, like it's not even the coding developer jobs. I mean, let's not even talk about that's like a really big inequality in that in that area specifically. But even in the commercial roles, when you say sales, I think it's very common for women to avoid these kinds of roles because it's like it's kind of like a man's world, right? Like a lot of like, even in like sometimes marketing can also be a thing, but it's mostly like sales or operations and then all these things that are like a bit more like the women are not very keen on doing. something in that
Yeah,
area.
I totally totally can relate to that, because I myself never saw myself as a salesperson. So overcoming that mental barrier that I had, and my perception about what a salesperson does and how it is to be a salesperson, was a huge barrier to overcome personally. I wasn't sure at all. So when I talk to different people, I also give them the advice to at least try it out. But I think that maybe there is also another reason why female are not attracted to these jobs. Is there anything in your experience, maybe related to the language and the positions, or what do you think it could be that is keeping women away from applying from even these commercial roles that don't require any
Yeah.
technical skills?
Yeah, I mean, I think that like there are many different factors. One thing is definitely like, how there's a lot of gender bias in specific roles. I mean, that's proven that like, when you check a lot of job ads in many different kinds of countries, like sales and other jobs that are similar have a very manly tone in terms of like, the language that they use in the job ad. So then it kind of like puts off a lot of women to apply. But the other thing is actually the understanding of the roles that are there. And this is something that I feel like should be, like spread out a little bit more to a lot of women, is that sales, for example, especially in the tech industry, is very different from like the actual sales where you just like are in a call center and you just call. Like there are very different dynamics on like these roles that you would typically think would be like something you wouldn't want to do as a woman. But when you actually enter into that role, you're like, oh, actually it's very different. So I think that like learning a little bit more about the different roles that tech companies has to offer is actually the big step in terms of you as an individual really understanding what's out there for me. Because I can tell you already now that like on the company side, I know that there are many companies that try to reverse and change their like gender bias and like using more gender neutral words in their job ads and all that. But to be honest, I observe that like there's still a really, really big gap, and there's still a lot of work on the company side to do that. So what we can do at this very moment as applicants, for example, is to actually just dare to try it out.
Yeah.
In that sense. And like, don't be too afraid of like, I know that it's a woman thing, I guess. I mean, we talked about this, Ellie, like, when you read a job ad, you want to be 100% qualified before you even apply. And maybe for men, it's typically, oh, if I'm 60% of this, why not? I want to try it. I think that like, borrowing that kind of mentality from men kind of thing
Yes.
would actually like benefit us a lot, like as women, to try it out and see possibilities, right?
Yeah, exactly. I can absolutely just confirm everything what you said. And when we still keep talking about not only the tech sector, but specifically the tech sector in Denmark, do you think that there is something special about the Danish market? You have a very diverse cultural background. You have also worked and lived in different countries, so you have a direct way of comparing these kind of things. So do you think there is something that applicants should be aware of when applying in Denmark and trying to enter the Danish sector if they come from somewhere else?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I would say that like, it applies to any country that you go to, right? Like there are like the cultural differences is definitely one thing that you need to learn first as an applicant. I mean, knowing like, okay, how are things done around here kind of question, right? I mean, one thing for me is that, even like the very start of like, okay, how do you get a job? Is it just through application? Oh, in Denmark, apparently a lot of it is coming from networking, because they don't even I mean, a lot of companies don't even post their job ads. They ask for referrals, for example. That's like a big thing. The other thing is like, okay, how do you write your CV in a Danish way? Like, in Germany, for example, I know this very much because I have also recruited a lot of Germans, where in Germany it's very formal, and it's the same in the Philippines. Like you need to like
Yes.
dear sir, madam, whatever. Like you need to
Yes.
be so respectful and formal and professional. But in Denmark, it's super casual.
Yeah.
So knowing how to adjust in this just on the tone of your, how you apply and how you talk to people actually already makes a difference, because then instantly, even subconsciously, for someone hiring you, they already understand that you understand the culture. And I mean, it's a big deal in the tech sector to have this like culture fit, like whatever that means, right?
Yeah.
In this sense, like having that culture fit is really important. So it also comes from how you approach it.
Yeah, exactly. Absolutely. And um, I think it is also something that you get to learn, and there are a lot of approaches to that. And even if you already overcome your barriers, you start applying. Like we have a question in the chat, for example, that I think because fits very well in this context, because it says we have Oana, who has experience in hotel management, and she already has also a little bit of selling experience, and she has applied to positions for commercial roles in the tech sector, but still not managing to crack that wall, to
Yeah,
crack the barrier. And I know that we had this conversation before, and I think it fits very well in the sense that we still wanted also to touch on what is your advice in terms of maybe mentioning some examples of what what is something that leaves a super positive impression on your side as a recruiter, when you get that kind of
yeah,
applications, and lots of applications for one
yeah.
position, what raises your attention, and also on the negative side of things, what would be the absolutely uh, don'ts from your side. So maybe that can help Oana as well to
Yeah.
increase her
Yeah,
her
perfect. Yeah, I would say that transitioning into a different sector. I think I touched upon this a little bit in my presentation, that like you can relate to the sector in a different way. Like let's just say Wana comes from hotel and restaurants. That's like service management. Looking for tech companies that have something to do, their product has something to do with the service industry, is probably one of the first things that you could look into. Like I started my job as sales in eloomi because I had a background in HR, and that was like my biggest selling point, like, oh, it's an HR company, you have a background in HR, you can probably talk to a lot of HR people better than a random salesperson can. So that's kind of like my entry point. So relating topics of interest instead of like the position could be one of the things that you can do. In terms of the question about what would make prompt me as a recruiter to look into you, I think it really depends. One thing is that if you start to look into the different jobs, especially the entry level positions, in like commercial positions in tech, languages, for example, is one of the big things, because reason for that is that a lot of tech companies want to expand their product in different countries within Europe. So if you speak a certain kind of language, that could be a thing that is the first thing that recruiters might look at. The other thing is, of course, the effort that you put into your application. Like, I'm not just saying that, like, oh, with your CV. Of course, sometimes you get notice in your CV, and the good recruiters will look through everyone's CV, but most of the time they don't have enough time. Like, when they receive the first 50 application and they get 10 good ones, they will probably forget about the next 100. So the other thing is just like, get notice. Aside from like, let's just say you have sent your application, maybe if you find a recruiter on LinkedIn, send them a message. Or I mean, I've even seen some people like, send snail mail into like different companies just to get notice, or sending a video or something like that, just to make yourself different. But what I mean by this is that you want to make yourself different, but also please align it to what they're looking for. Like, if they want a salesperson, then maybe tailor your presentation into a bit more of like a sales pitch. But if you're someone in marketing, then be a bit more on the creative side. I mean, if you are in finance, I mean, the person that will be looking at your application is probably not someone that would be happy with like, oh, now I have a YouTube video of myself having a ridiculous presentation. Like, you also need to align, your tailoring of your job to the persona of who you're submitting your application to. So if you think that the job is a bit more formal, be formal. Be different, but be formal. So like aligning would be one thing. And the last thing is like in terms of the don'ts, I mean, if a company receives a lot of applications, and I think it's also very much of a human nature that if you appear to be, like really desperate, that kind of like removes you from like, it also gives the other person this feeling of like, okay, why are you so desperate? Like, you also start to question, is there something wrong with your application that you want to go 3 steps ahead to be noticed? Like, these kinds of things can also be a factor, to be honest. So, finding that balance of like being different, but not seemingly, really pushing it in a way is a hard job, to be honest. And I haven't really also cracked the code in terms of like what really appeals to me and what doesn't. But in most cases, like, playing your cards right in this sense is really something that's super important. Otherwise, like, there could be certain biases that you might be falling into, and it's sad, of course, but it just happens, and we just need to accept that, right? Like, and there's a long way to go to correct these kinds of like, mistakes, if you can say.
Yeah, I remember that you also said, that for people who have been looking for a job for a very long time, it gets more difficult even to crack that that door, right?
Yeah.
Because I remember you mentioned that it just somehow reflects that you just really want a job. That unconsciously you reflect that in your application. Do you have any advice on how to avoid doing that for long-term job seekers?
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that I would really advise is to actually clarify why you didn't have a job. Like, I know a lot of people are afraid to be like, oh, should I skip this like 1 year where I went traveling and or I helped my family do something? Because the Danish job market is a bit more informal, I have actually seen people explain their 1 year gap and being like, I was with my sick mother, I had to take care of her, so I had to leave my job. We're all human, we understand that, and that's the reason. And not having an explanation actually will put me off better. I'm like, what are you hiding? Like, why are you not unemployed? I mean, some people are also like, oh, but like, my company got bankrupt, I was terminated, and for the longest time I could not find a job, and I had to focus on other things instead. That's okay. Like these kinds of things, I think that's really helpful in terms of like breaking that barrier. And also a lot of expats that move here, just, it's easy to explain. I had to apply for a visa and I was not allowed to work for 10 months. Sure, like that's okay as well, right? So having an explanation is a big thing.
Yeah. We have a couple of questions, more questions in the chat coming up. So from Isara, she's very grateful for your presentation, Anna, and she says that she has a background in education and teaching, and that she's interested in natural language processing, and she would like to have your opinion on how to upskill. Like, what would you recommend? Coursera or a university degree? What would you say?
I mean, I'm not very familiar, to be honest, with like, her background in terms of like, what's in store in terms of like the natural language processing and all these kinds of things. I mean, I would say that like a lot of these like Coursera, EDX, and I think LinkedIn Learning, like there's a lot of online courses that actually provide you with certifications. I would definitely say look more into them and like, find the best places where there's a high volume of people that are doing the same courses as you. Will probably give you a bit more credibility, because then the people that are hiring in this sector will probably be more familiar with those kinds of courses as well, right? So that's that.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And Olga is asking what the optimum size for an application
Yeah.
would look like in terms of
Mhm.
paragraphs, sentences, max
Yeah.
and minimum. Is
Yeah.
there some good practices there?
Well, I would say that if a job ad asked for a cover letter, one page is definitely the best. Like, people don't bother to read more than that.
Yeah,
I mean, the shorter the better, the more
yeah,
straightforward you are, also the better. Like, the more you can easily just like pinpoint and align your skills towards the job. No nonsense, I would say, because people don't
yeah,
have a lot of time to read, right?
yeah. Yes,
Yeah.
exactly. So that's my experience as well. One,
Yeah.
one for the cover letter and one
And
for
one
the
for this.
CV.
Yeah, exactly.
Exactly. And then there are two questions that are actually in the same category
Mhm.
regarding how to get an internship. What would be if you have any tips basically for interviews, for getting
Yeah,
interviews, for getting internships as a developer, and how to
yeah,
present yourself if you're a career changer. Any tips on
yeah,
that?
yeah. I mean, I'm actually going to answer this two ways. Like, one thing that is also a general advice for everyone is that if you want to network and actually want to maybe get some internships, for example, is that one way to enter is actually not to just like go and network with the hiring managers, but actually be friends with the people that will be your future colleagues.
Yeah.
And this is one thing that I would say could be interesting for someone that wants to enter and might want to have internships. Be friends with other developers. Like, I think you understand each other, like these kinds of like understanding of like, oh, I just moved to Denmark. I'm a developer back in my country, and I actually just wanted to learn a little bit more how you guys do it here and all that. Do you offer any internships? And just be friends with them. Starting that kind of relationship will probably, bring you closer to, yeah, getting an internship, for example. And in terms of like to present yourself in a career as a career changer, I guess it really depends. It's a very, very specific thing, right? Like, how do you want to change? Like, what kind of transferable skills can you offer to the position, and all these things. So I think it's definitely a much bigger question, in that sense. You can also connect to me on LinkedIn if you want, and I can answer this in detail. I mean,
You're
I know
gonna
it's
be
really
swamped
interesting.
with
Um,
requests now.
but I mean, I really do try to answer people, because like, I know how difficult it is to start over and find a job and all these things. So if I have time, I definitely answer people, and or at least direct them to
Yeah,
the right
yeah.
sources.
We're like unfortunately running out of time, but
Yeah,
I still would like to we just if it is okay for you, and maybe we
yeah,
can like take uh, three more questions, because
yeah,
we
of
have
course.
a couple of questions in the chat. And there is one from Oksana, for example, that
Yeah,
she mentioned. She's asking whether you could say a little bit more about customer success and sales
yeah,
analyst roles, maybe
yeah,
a little bit, because we will like as you mentioned at the beginning, we will continue with the series, and we are planning on inviting different people who are actually working in
yeah.
these areas that you presented at the beginning, to share their insights and experiences in that position, and also their career path, and how they actually managed to land in there.
Yeah.
That's something that's coming up, but maybe very briefly, if you have some insights on those two roles.
Yeah. So, well, customer success, it's a post-sales role, meaning that, you're not the first person that closes the deal, but once the customer becomes your customer, a lot of tech companies, and this is also the wonders of software, is that there might be a lot of add-ons that you can purchase after your initial, product, right? So customer success are mostly the people that would do the upselling of products. So it entails sales and sales skills for sure, but it's not as cutthroat as like a pre-sales and actual sales role. And some other companies, customer success / account manager is not necessarily 100% like a hardcore sales role as well, but it's also about like implementation. So ensuring that, the customer gets the right value. So I know that like these terms, actually, this is also something that you guys need to be careful about, is that a lot of these things don't mean the same for many companies. First of all, the reason for that is that many startups and scale-ups, they usually just put random things where they see would be a good name for certain positions. So definitely reading what the position entails is a really good thing to learn, if it's actual sales role or if it's account management where you just need to take care of customer implementation. Yeah, and the other thing was like with analysts. So in many companies, like especially for, when you're in a commercial role, you would need to do like some sort of like optimization for processes and all these things. So a business analyst or business intelligence is mostly the ones that like making sure that you have a very efficient, effective sales process or whatever processes you have within the company, providing analytics on conversion rates, ratio from the initial call to closing the deal, and all these kinds of things. So if you're good with crunching numbers and data sets and all that, then that's definitely interesting for you.
Yeah, super. Then let's take the last two questions. So from Maria, she says that she has a bachelor in psychology and a master in clinical psychology, and that she has become interested in human resources and then just moved to Copenhagen as well and is trying to pursue a career in HR. But that she has also, become a little bit interested in coding. But that her background is mainly theoretical, and she's asking what would be her options eventually from, what is your take?
Yeah. I mean, I would say like it depends on what you want, right? Like, so if you want to pursue a career in HR, like I would definitely say some entry-level recruiter role could be interesting. Like, so in recruitment, there's also different kinds of roles. One of the entry-level ones is what you call a talent sourcer. So basically just, looking for CVs and talents on LinkedIn or any other job portal and kind of like doing the initial outreach. And then you pass on interviews and all that to a more like experienced recruiter. That's one thing that could be interesting. The other thing is that if you really do want to get into the coding and the theoretical and all these kinds of things, is actually just start to maybe find a mentor that is actually a developer or someone in tech, and maybe start with an internship. So that I would say would be like some interesting options.
Join a circle at Fearless into Tech.
One of our if you're interested in a sales role, we are still hiring at eloomi.
And at Templafire as well.
Exactly.
I'm not sure, but definitely check the positions. And now the very last question, and we get this question a lot. The question is from Vesela, and she's asking how important it is to have a tech-related university degree when you're applying, to software development roles. So like the hard code ones.
This is something that I see very often, and it's just my experience. If you want to apply for a software developer role, if you don't have any experience, then a university degree becomes like, oh, I want to look into that, like what kind of background you have. The other thing is, if you don't have a degree for it, and if you create a portfolio of what you can do, like have a website or something where people can actually see what you can do as a developer, that's your entry. Like, a lot of companies don't look into your degree. If you actually can present a valid portfolio, that is exactly what they need in the role that they're hiring for, I'd say.
Yeah, I would recommend Vesela and everybody here one of our past sessions that we hosted in March. It's on our YouTube channel. We will post the link of the YouTube channel in our Facebook group and also on LinkedIn again. And you can go there, and I will recommend you to watch the videos that we have uploaded there, because we have one session where we invited 4 amazing women who are all working in technical roles, like hardcore technical roles, and they all have a very different background and very different stories on how they actually got to be where they are at the moment. and that wasn't always following the straight path and getting certifications, but in very, very, very different ways. So I definitely recommend everybody to do that. And I also I would just like to extend an invitation to everybody who attended here to follow us, because we definitely will be organizing more of these events once a month. We will have somebody joining us to share their perspectives and experience with roles and paths, career paths in the tech sector. Also thank you for joining tonight. If you're interested in eventually coding and programming, you can contact us at Fearless into Tech, because we also have circles where we get together and just have a small community where we learn ourselves, but we help each other out and start from scratch. None of us has a hardcore technical background, but we just learn together and facilitate, or try to facilitate, mentors and try to facilitate networking. And as a follow-up to this session, we are planning on organizing also a practical session where I will be sharing some of my personal experiences on how I managed to sort of enter the Danish job market, more like with showcasing real examples of CVs, real examples of application letters that actually landed me an invitation to some position that I applied to. We will also post that in the social media. So again, follow us. And Anna, so grateful to you for joining us tonight. It has been really super insightful and amazing to have you. Thank you for your time and for sharing with us.
Yes, you're welcome. And I hope that everyone that has been here, it has been, valuable for you guys to spend an hour with us and with me. So and good luck on your ventures. As I said, you can always connect with me on LinkedIn as well. And if you approach me nicely, I will definitely, be able to start a conversation if that's something that you would be interested to dig deeper. Have a great evening, everyone. And thank you as well, Ellie, for inviting me.
Amazing. Thank you, everybody, and good evening to everyone. Bye.
Bye.